Welcome to this new lesson in the Mac Photos section. I'm going to walk through a full portrait editing the way that I would using the Photos app. So I'm going to open up this portrait of my silly face, click Edit, and I want to make sure that I revert to original so that it doesn't have any edits that I did in the previous lessons. Great. So here's my original photo, and let's walk through the entire process. So this is going to be sort of a longer lesson, but hopefully you sort of enjoy seeing my entire process. The first thing that I always do is crop my photo so that I'm not editing anything that I don't want to edit. When I do that in Photos, it automatically tries to crop in, which is nice, but I like to do it myself. I am going to keep the original aspect ratio, and let me just crop in. I do want to just be a little bit closer to my face. You know, depending on what I'm using this for, I might need it to be a little bit closer in. I might want to get rid of my crotch area down there if that's a little unflattering for me. Maybe just punching in just a little bit like that actually looks pretty darn good. Cool. So that's a quick crop. Let's go back to our adjustment features and start from the beginning. The first thing that I actually do is usually fix the white balance. So with this photo, we did see that using the skin tone slider, we can, or the skin tone eyedropper, we can choose a nice white balance, and it has that saved from before, and I like that. So I'm gonna leave it how that is. A quick note, if you have red eye in your photos, you can use this red eye removal. Just click the eyedropper, and then you have this circle, and then you just click on the eye, and it's going to actually remove the red eye from your photos. Next, I like to adjust the exposure, and with the Photos app, I'm going to use the light adjustments up here. My face is a little bit dark, I would say, especially because the background is so bright. It's a little distracting from my face, so I want to start with the shadows just to bring up some of the dark parts of my face. When I do that, though, it does bring up some of the brighter parts of the background, so I might take the brightness down just a little bit. Not the brightness, which you can get rid of any edits by clicking it again, but actually the highlights. Just like so. The black point, though, I feel like is a little bit too bright, so I'm going to drag this up just a little bit to bring in a little bit of contrast. I'm going to maybe play with a little bit of contrast later on with my curves down below. But overall, seeing this before, after, I like this adjustment. Now, I'm zooming in, and it actually looks pretty sharp. When you're zoomed out, it's hard to see if it's sharp, but that's looking pretty good. Next, let's look at our color. For portraits, I really am not going to add that much saturation, but because with shooting raw, it does have sort of more of a neutral flat look, I will add just slightly a little bit of saturation. When I do that, though, as you saw before when I was teaching you about this, it adds a lot of red to my face. So I might actually go into selective color, choose the reds, and then drop down the saturation just a little bit. And that helps a little bit just to get rid of some of those red parts of my face. Playing with the range, I want to see if that selects more, and that does. I don't want to desaturate too much because then that's going to get rid of the color of my lips, which I don't want to do. That will make me look like a zombie, although maybe you want to look like a zombie. Okay, so one other thing that I didn't show you before was retouching. So if I zoom in here, I usually stay away from retouching too much, but I want to teach you in case you want to learn how to do it. You have this retouching option down here. Click this eyedropper or the paintbrush. You can adjust the size by dragging or to the right or left on this slider. And basically, all you have to do is click over any sort of blemish or thing you don't want. One quick note, if you have the brush or the eyedropper and you want to move around your image, press the space bar, you get a hand tool, and now you can click and drag, move around your image, and then pressing the spacebar, you're back with the retouch brush, which is a lot faster than turning off the retouch brush, moving around, and then going back to the retouch. So say I want to get rid of this pimple right here, or not pimple, this freckle right there. Clicking it gets rid of it automatically. I mean, Mac Photos is pretty smart at knowing what you might want to get rid of. Clicking, it kind of uses the skin around it to blend in. Now you don't want to go too crazy because it can start to look a little weird, but that's a quick way to get rid of any sort of blemishes that you don't want on your image. Usually I like leaving people naturally how they look, but depending on what you want to do, that might look good for your portraits. So that's retouching. For black and white, I might just turn this on and off to see what black and white looks like. That actually looks pretty neat, but that kind of takes away a lot of the fun of editing this image, so I'm going to turn that off. Now that I look at it, I'm noticing that the rotation of my head is a little bit too much, so I'm going to go back into the crop window and rotate just a little bit so that my eyes are a little bit more level on the image, which I think will look better. Something like that. Yeah. It can still be a little bit tilted. That's totally fine, but it was just a little bit too much in my opinion. Center so it looks a little bit more balanced. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Let's go back to our adjustment filters. All right, so let's go into our curves tab and let's see. I might add a little bit of contrast. See what that looks like by dragging this down, doing our standard sort of S curve. And once you've made those adjustments, you can go back and add more. And you could add more points if you want, but usually 2 points on this curve is good enough. You can also adjust specific colors within the curves. Now I'm on RGB, which remember if you watch the color section of this course, we learned that RGB is one way of reading colors, and that encompasses all the colors in the world, and so it's adjusting the contrast for everything. But if we want to adjust the reds, for example, another way to decrease the reds is by decreasing the red curve like this. As I do that though, the other colors, the greens and the blues, get more prominent. So you want to be careful about this. It's a cool way to add sort of a green tint or a blue tint, but it's not the best way to get rid of a specific red color. That's what I would use the selective color for. Okay, so we're back where we were without the red curve. So just adding that little bit of contrast is good. I'm going to look at my vignette. I don't really need to sharpen or do any noise reduction. The Fuji X-T2 of Will's was really sharp. Really don't need to do much. Love the bokeh, the falling off, the sharpness on my face. It's crazy how shallow that depth of field is. I mean, it might be slightly off. You can see that like part of my mouth is super sharp, but right behind in my ears, it's starting to fall off. So maybe I'll go in, add a little bit of sharpening, just a tiny bit, just to make sure the details of my eyes are perfectly sharp, or as sharp as possible. Now let's zoom out before we add a vignette. So for portraits, I tend to add vignettes, not for all photos, not really for landscapes, but for portraits I will. So I usually go like crazy and then I dial it back. So let's go a little crazy, dial it back, and then increase the softness and maybe decrease the radius. Turn this on, off, on, off. That's a good way to see what it looks like. And that's actually looking pretty darn good. The only thing is it's still a little dark in my opinion. And so that's one thing. You might be editing your photo, going through everything, and then realizing it still looks a little bit dark, and then you have to go back and make those adjustments. So now I'm just going to go for the overall exposure and see what that looks like. That might work. I'll try brightness, and that might be the better option. Just a little bit, just like that. Nice. I think that's a pretty darn good headshot edit. Let's go see the before, after, before, after. If you want to see before the crop, we can click revert to original from there. And then I'm going to undo that by pressing the Command Z button. That's a completely different photo in terms of editing, in terms of composition. I like this one a lot better. I could use this when I start my acting career. Thank you, Will, for that headshot. Cool. So that is sort of my entire process for editing this photo. In the next lesson, I'm going to be looking at one of those landscape photos, the Dodger Stadium one, to show you how I would edit that photo, which might be a little bit more fun and unique, and we can get a little bit more creative with colors and things like that. All right. See you in the next lesson.